What's up, y'all? Welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about something pretty serious for the channel and something kind of relevant that I haven't covered yet, which is the Stop Killing Games movement. If you're unfamiliar with what the Stop Killing Games movement is, I have it pulled up and I'll explain it in just 1 second, but before I do, if you guys could take a second out of your day to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on the video, it would go a long way to help me promote this channel and get more traction, so run it up. Based off their own website's description, Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying games that they have sold to customers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to customers, but makes preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. So essentially, publishers and developers are taking these games that they create that either have a live service or online element that is necessary to play and experience the game that people are meant to purchase and supposedly have forever. But once these servers are offline and the developers and publishers stop supporting the game that they've helped produce and cultivate an audience for, the game dies. And there's no way for players to get the value out of the money that they put into the experience back. As someone who lives in the US, there's nothing that I can do to participate in this movement except for making noise about it myself. Even here on their website, it states that these remaining options unfortunately exclude citizens from other countries from participating directly, but all other options we have found are either exhausted or already underway. While it can be frustrating to be unable to act in other countries, the most effective action to take is to spread the word on these initiatives to those who are eligible to sign, which is what I'm doing right now. While the movement doesn't explicitly impact me as a United States citizen currently, the policymakers in the European Union that can actually uphold the consumer's desire to stop killing games can possibly impact globally the entire gaming market and shake things up a little bit for consumers such as myself. In order to really understand the basis for this issue, you're going to have to take a look at each of the 3 perspectives that kind of fuel this entire issue as it is. The first and foremost being that of the consumer, the second being that of the developer, and the third being that of the government and the policymakers that can actually enact change for consumers and or game developers depending on which way the pendulum swings. So starting out with the consumer, we have kind of the arbiter of this entire movement, which is Accursed Farms, otherwise known as Ross Scott. As you can see here, this is his website, and he has a game list of all the games that he's interested in, and there's 1,394 games that this man is interested in. So clearly you can see that he's an avid consumer of game products. So around 2 weeks ago, Accursed Farms releases this video. I know you guys can't see the title, but it's called The End of Stop Killing Games, where it was projected that the movement was kind of a failure, that it wasn't going to succeed. And this is his response to common opposition of the movement itself. And I'll just play this clip for you guys. I'll pause when necessary and kind of give my 2 cents on it.
For all the support and fair coverage we've received, there's been some opposition too. Though I want to say 80, maybe even 90% of people who are against the initiative are against it because they think it's doing something it's not. For example, the #1 criticism about the initiative that we've never been able to shake is that it's unworkable because you can't expect publishers to support games forever. Yeah, we know. That's why we've never asked for that. I must have said this 100 times now. It was written on the website from day 1. But
we are in favor of publishers ending support for a game whenever they choose. What we're asking for is that they implement an end-of-life plan to modify or patch the game so that it can run on customer systems with no further support from the company being necessary. So I just got out of a call with one of my friends who I'm working on a game project with at the moment, and I was asking him some questions about servers for online games that are specifically online only and how it would be possible for consumers to be able to run their servers by themselves. Because I'm a designer, I'm not really familiar with how servers and programming, networked programming on a fundamental level, it's way above my pay grade. But essentially what I've come to understand is that the way it would work is the developer provides the end user with a package to kind of create their own server supporting peer-to-peer or more LAN-like gameplay online. This would be perfect for single-player games that require you to be online, such as The Crew, Ubisoft, as well as some other games that aren't coming to my mind right now, but do require you to be be online in order to play the experience. But I mean, personally, so far, everything that he's been saying seems extremely valid and extremely tactful. He's not overstepping, and he's giving companies a lot of wiggle room to be able to play into consumer demands without sacrificing the integrity of their IP. But let's get back to it.
But this keeps coming up over and over again. See, that's the thing. As soon as you say 3 words on requiring end-of-life plans, gamers especially will jump to some conclusion, and I never know where they're gonna land. Ironically, non-gamers tend to be much better at understanding the initiative, because they're not coming with a whole bag full of assumptions. A couple other criticisms are how this would violate copyright law by forcing publishers to give up their intellectual property. No, it wouldn't. Some of you may want to pause this.
The initiative wouldn't conflict with copyright law for 2 reasons. Customer would have no additional rights beyond what they are sold in the first place, the ability to run a copy of the publisher's game. The only difference between now would be the publisher would no longer be able to permanently revoke the license without any fault from the customer, i.e. hacking, online cheating, etc. Because the initiative focuses exclusively on the outcome, a working game, and not the methodology for doing so, source code, server binaries, specific files, etc. No specific demands for any intellectual property are being made to the publisher. This leaves full discretion to the publisher in how they wish to manage their intellectual property, whether the publisher may deem it necessary to release more intellectual property to fulfill the requirement of letting the customer retain a copy of their game. The initiative is not specifically mandating that. Alright, so that's a fucking mouthful. My interpretation of this is that the customer is only entitled to what the company is saying that the customer is entitled to anyway. The only addition is that, let's say, like, you're playing Call of Duty, right? And you get banned for cheating. That would no longer be able to happen because it wouldn't be happening on Call of Duty's specific developer-oriented servers. It would be happening on a consumer server where there isn't as heavy of moderation, is what I'm picking up from this. I'm not very good at legal speak, if you couldn't tell, but this is what I'm getting from that paragraph, at least. The second paragraph, this kind of leaves his argument open-ended. He's saying that he's not asking for it. If that's what it comes down to, that's what it comes down to. But because he's not asking for it, he's saying that it isn't going to be the case, that he's not actually asking for any part of the intellectual property. Therefore, this movement doesn't represent the want of the consumer to have the right to manipulate the intellectual property. Instead, he's just asking for the games to be able to be playable once the developer has deemed that there should be no further work put into the experience, whether that be through updates or supporting the servers.
Or how this won't work because of end-user license agreements.
The initiative would still work regardless of what terms are stated in the end-user license agreements, since if passed, it would become an EU directive which would supersede any conflicting terms of consumer license agreements. So he's saying that if the government steps in and gets involved, it has to be this way because it'll override the entirety of the license agreements made by the developers because they are not a governing entity. Although there's a lot of people that treat these companies like governing bodies, which is insane, but let's keep going.
That's also not a problem. Or how this isn't possible because publishers already have agreements with other companies and don't have the rights to distribute that code. We're aware of that.
Terms of the initiative would still be possible regardless of any pre-existing deals with publishers that might conflict with it because it is not retroactive. If passed, it would no longer go into effect until likely years from now, giving publishers time to make new deals for future games they wish to sell in the EU. For existing games where these terms would still not be possible, there are multiple options, but only the EU Commission could make the final decision on what would happen. Some examples are shutting down the game before the new directive goes into effect, exempting existing games from the new requirements, and only affecting new games sold after the directive goes into effect. So he's still saying that the government would ultimately have control and that the developers wouldn't have control, and that the government would supersede the developers who are trying to use these end-user agreement licenses as law, essentially, which is just not the case. I mean, you have to comply with their agreements in order to consume the product because they're the company, but if the actual government that is overseeing all of this legislation gets involved, then obviously their word actually is law, and you kind of have to bend to the government, low-key, no cap. I can already see how people are going to start misconstruing this as, oh, but then the government has control over things, and why would we want the government to have more control over stuff like this? I understand that it doesn't always work like this, but the entire point of the government is to protect the interests of the common person. They should be working to protect us from this kind of scummy business practice. At the end of the day, that's what it is. Ending support for a game that requires online stuff, and then you're not giving the consumer the online stuff after they've already bought the product, you're losing. But so the reason why this movement has been gaining so much traction over the past couple of weeks is because of one man's inconceivable fuck up, which was drawing negative support to something that actually would do good for consumers. I'll let him introduce himself. Here he is.
Hi. My name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio, and I've been here for about 8 years now. I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in Discord, and most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do...
Okay, cool. He's noble. Great, awesome. I'm gonna kind of skim through this video and show you guys the most relevant parts to the developer side of the argument. No matter how flawed you may think it is, hear him out, approach it with an open mind, and I'll give you my 2 cents on it after the fact.
The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state. Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher. This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague and will damage all live service games. How would you keep League of Legends in a functional playable state? You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is called client-server. In client-server models, there's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server. The client just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do a billion damage. You don't trust the client.
Like I brought up with the Call of Duty example, the reason why he doesn't believe that this support should end is because of players' ability to cheat and the lack of moderation that live service games and online server-based games require in order to stay in a functional, playable, fair state, which I understand. I don't think that he's correct in the sense that this is vague. It's vague enough to allow the government to be able to enact it without scaring developers away from the conversation. That's why it's left so vague. This is something that they should try to come to the table for, to discuss with consumers in order to reach a compromise.
It's really easy to say like, oh, you know, that'll get worked out down the line. But we're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas, specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues, especially if you don't have precedent set. Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense, with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of saving games. I can't agree with that.
So he calls out a very, true point. Things take a really long time in government to get actually implemented in terms of policy, and it's difficult to avoid a lot of the weird legal vocabulary that government uses to ensnare and entrap people in fraudulent or unlawful activity, especially companies and consumers, and the balance between those two dynamics. It's a very weird balance that government needs to strike in order to make everyone happy, and I can see where he's coming from in the fact that this wouldn't make a whole lot of developers happy from the stance that government would have more control.
What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people. Due to the game's size and France's strong consumer protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that it has a player base of 12 million people. That is not how long-running games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore. If there's any costs associated with keeping the game online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to keep running it.
It was only online because the developers, for some reason, chose to make a single-player game only playable if you were connected to an online server that they maintained, which, when you think about it, is planned obsolescence. If support for the game wasn't going to exist forever, then it's effectively planned obsolescence. There's no way around that. So he is wrong about this specific take. Literally only a microscopic amount of further research showed me that the crew, which I'll pull up right now, did have a single-player game mode. While it was designed as an always-online game with multiplayer and co-op features, it also included a single-player campaign and solo activities like skills and challenges. Now, because the game and the servers have shut down, it's completely unplayable. If you want to experience the single-player, oh well, too bad, oh well. But let's keep rolling forward.
Right? So the cost outweighs the amount of income for it. There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell a online-only game as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that. When they do, we should be calling out that specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about the crew itself. And if we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that the crew was actually created in 2014. So this was an online-only racing video game. With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing...
It shouldn't be normal, though. This is the argument that I think he's missing, is that buying a product that you're under the impression you'll be able to own forever, and then 10 years down the line, let's say you boot it up and you don't realize that all this is happening, because let's be honest, the average person isn't keeping up to date with every single piece of gaming news. Let's say you open up the game and it says, sorry, unable to access the Ubisoft servers, the dedicated server. You're gonna be pissed. And the thing that you paid for 10 years ago, it just doesn't exist anymore. Bad take on his end, but let's keep going. Maybe he'll redeem himself.
Thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they post it as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online-only. If you're going to be buying an online-only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down in the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut. If it's...
Not at all. If you're purchasing a game that is online only, and you understand fully that the game is online only, and then the developer 10 years later decides, oh, sorry, no more, you shouldn't be subject to dealing with the consequence of purchasing something that you were planning on enjoying for a long time, regardless of the player base. I get that it is costly for some developers, but they can always outsource to a third party and just pay the third party to keep the servers running, which I think is ultimately what's going to end up happening.
If it's a single player experience that has online only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future,
it makes no sense to me how you can have this take. No developer creates online only functionality to then strip it away in the future. Like that's just a nothing burger of a sentence, because that doesn't happen. I don't know what he's talking about here. This is a very weird segment.
And the online only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's a shitty business practice, but that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games. Further, there's more context to this too. The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018. And then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this, it's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms. We look at the max here, it did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded, and it had a major drop-off in 2018, which is the same year that it launched a sequel. This is...
I mean, you can't blame consumers for not playing Ubisoft games because they're kind of mid, but let's keep going.
It's normal. When a sequel comes out, a lot of the player base, if the sequel doesn't suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die. You can't run a live service game on this few players. You can't, most of the time, especially not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that anything else, and we could see that there was license problems. So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted the crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months. Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal, but if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it, if it was in the terms of service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints? Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years. And that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, understand that's speculation, but I've seen this type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already...
I played the crew very briefly. I'm going to be honest. I don't remember there being a huge emphasis on a lot of different online multiplayer PvP components. I'm sure that there was, but in my time playing it, I just kind of drove around and did races on my own with like AI. I don't believe that I actually played head to head against anyone. The point that he made about single player games, I find that to be a little odd. Let me back it up a little bit.
To renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure.
This I understand. Like if there's a license that goes beyond the game itself and is about the contents within the game, specifically cars and racing games, I know that they have to license out from the car companies what cars they use inside of their game. That's understandable. The only thing is, if you're buying a product full price and you expect it to be around forever, revoking the consumer's ability to play this content, to enjoy and experience this content, companies need to be smarter than that. They can't just say, oh, 10 years have gone by, that's it. There's no argument against that is gonna, I don't know, alter the way that I think about how consumer money should be protected.
And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that that doesn't make any sense in the first place.
I think if this legislation were to be passed by the EU, if this movement were to actually spark change within the EU and the game industry as a whole, I think that making a single player option so that games could still be experienced, even if it's small, even if it's like a 2-hour single player experience, just so that there's something that players can still experience of that game that they've purchased, I think it makes sense, and you don't need a whole client server for that. I understand where he's coming from. Game development is difficult as it is, right? Especially when you tack on the fact that so many different players want so many different things, and in live service games, it's hard to split your dev team up to create a meaningful single player experience when the focus isn't even on that in the game as it is. It makes no sense, and he's completely right about that. However, if you're paying $60 to now $80 for an experience, you should be able to own that experience for the rest of your life. There has to be some kind of middle ground. So while I see what he's saying, and from a development standpoint, it makes complete sense. It does. From a consumer perspective, there needs to be another alternative in order to retain access to what you're paying for.
You're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already have sequels out and the game has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on. I don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective. These are two different ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies.
He's right.
I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them. And we're going to miss out on adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any other live service game, any of them. You're talking everything, like even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize that phone games require online-only activity. What about things like Pokemon Go? What about stuff like Monster Hunter Now? What about any of these? We'd never get any of them And that's why I think this...
That's a bad argument. We'd never get any of them. That's a bad argument. We would definitely get them if this was put into effect. It would just be a lot more beneficial to the consumer than it would be the developer. And he's right. I mean, this does put a lot of strain on development time and development cost and development money. However, you always have to put the player first. Business practices included.
Needs to not be vague. It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements. That's the problem.
I agree with some of his perspective. I think that he has some pretty good takes and some pretty bad takes. The way that he puts the consumer kind of in a box and isn't really seeing things from their perspective. I know he said that he understands, but there's a difference between saying you understand and actually understanding. And I think that he just says that he understands and is unwilling to kind of compromise his position as a developer in order to give credit to the consumer who is actually right in this instance. While he brings up a good point about how the vagueness can make developers a little weary about taking their games in a direction that they may not want to take them in, I don't know. Look, I'm not trying to shit on pirate software because that's just like the it thing to do right now. He does have some really good takes from a development side, but he's disregarding the consumer and it's just rubbing me the wrong way. There's something about it that's rubbing me the wrong way. My take as a developer is the player always comes first. No matter what you're talking about, whether that be in gameplay, whether that be in business practices, the player always needs to come first because ultimately that's how you sell the product. If players want this to be the case, if players want there to be a viable option for them to play both on and offline, then developers are going to have to start investing in ways for players to be able to play on and offline. I'm not saying fork over the ability to manipulate the IP and degrade its integrity, because that's ridiculous and no developer wants that. And he's right that there are issues when it comes to cheaters and hackers and stuff like that, especially on servers that aren't moderated by developers. That's a very good point. However, that's a risk that I think consumers are willing to take in this instance. If you're trying to just play PvP or peer-to-peer with your colleagues on a game that you really enjoy, then you should be able to do it, even after the company doesn't want to support it anymore. And that's just a risk that you'll have to take as a consumer. Also, gonna be completely 100% honest, I don't think that the majority of consumers even know how to operate their own servers. I'm one of those. Like, I don't really know how to operate. I'm sure I could look it up and figure it out and it wouldn't be that difficult for me, but I've never learned how to do it, and I have no desire to until I have to, essentially. So we've seen both of the developer side and the consumer side, but what about the side of the government? What about that last final deciding factor? Video Games Europe, which is a division of government regulation of video games in the EU, has released a statement about the Stop Killing Games movement, and here is what they had to say. We appreciate the passion of our community. However, the decision to discontinue online services is multifaceted, never taken lightly, and must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. We understand that it can be disappointing for players, but when it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. Was 3 months before the crew ended fair notice? Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. We welcome the opportunity to discuss our position with policymakers and those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. Basically, this is just championing everything that Pirate Software has already said. There's going to be no protection for players if this is the case, and it is going to be ridiculously expensive to create a multifaceted option for players that provides both an online and single player experience to ensure that the player never is out of content. I think that this is the biggest crock of shit I've ever heard in my entire life. The government responding to this means that the movement's working. The movement is being taken seriously enough to be recognized by a government entity and responded to, albeit not the response that we're looking for. I think that there is going to be a boiling point when consumers are just fed up for paying $60 to $80 to $100, depending on the game, for an experience that completely gets taken away after a set amount of time. It's just not fair to the consumer. Sure, you know, you can claim that it's not safe for the user, that it's degrading the IP, when in actuality it's the consumer's choice. If they want to partake in an unsafe activity at their own expense, then that is entirely their decision. I mean, that's like saying don't go sailing because you can drown. It's not like buying a Big Mac. It's not just gonna dissolve in your digestive system once you purchase it because it's food, right? Video games are effectively sold as goods, and you shouldn't be able to take it away from someone who spends a lot of their hard-earned money on the goods that they're purchasing. I think that the government is very off base with their statement regarding Stop Killing Games. I think that Pirate Software had some really good ideas, and I understand where all of the speculation and opposition of this case is coming from. However, I think ultimately, if enough consumers rise to the occasion and stay the course, change can happen. Other than government regulation and government third-party server holders getting involved, I think the only way to protect the developers from any legal issues regarding their intellectual property and the content that some users might be unlawfully participating in on their own home servers is once you give the server package to the community, you no longer become liable. The government can't implicate you on anything. I think that would make a lot more sense. And I think that the way that you handle it is just by being upfront with consumers and saying, hey, swim at your own risk. But alright, that's going to be it for me, guys. I've been recording this video since I want to say about 4 p.m. and right now it's half hour to midnight. So I'm going to finish it up, edit it up, button it up, and head to bed. I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. If you stuck it out all the way through to the end of the video, please like, subscribe. Don't forget to comment down below what your take is on this entire issue. I'd be really interested to know what you guys have to say. And yeah, so long.